Now, the other ones that we've deliberately did this, which is I wanted to put all the John Hughes teen movies. That would be the John Hughes movies that either wrote the script to, directed, or just produced. So sometimes he would use Howard Deutsch or Chris Columbus to direct instead. And John Hughes made so many movies in the 80s, like Trains, Planes, and Automobiles, and Home Alone, that aren't teen movies, so we're not going to talk about them. We'll probably do a whole episode on John Hughes movies, period. But I just want to focus on teens, and we're going to do this one chronologically, which is 16 Candles. I saw it when it came out in the movie theater. I was actually 18. It was my last week of high school, and I saw it over the weekend. And in the movie, Molly Ringwald plays a girl who lives in the Chicago suburbs, because we're back in the Chicago suburbs, whose older sister is about to get married. Paul Dooley plays her dad, and she's very overlooked. She has a nerdy best friend played by Anthony Michael Hall, who's also very awkward. She has a crush on a guy named Jake, who I can't remember the actor. And John Hughes had at that point been a writer for National Lampoon. He wrote some very funny stories. I think that's the first time I really saw a teen comedy since My Bodyguard, where the emotional life of teens felt really honest. It wasn't a cautionary tale like Risky Business or Last American Virgin. It was somewhat similar to Fast Times, but really, it wasn't about the sex at all. It was much more about finding yourself. It was about love. It was about attraction. There's a million things in this movie that are straight up racist, or as you kids like to say, problematic. So I don't want to say.
Well,
even Molly Ringwald herself wrote some stuff about it. But
the Asian character was especially bad in this.
Duck Wong. Yeah.
We're almost at a Mickey Rooney level, Breakfast at Tiffany's level with that guy.
There's things about this movie that are just inexcusable. But I have to tell you, I remember telling a girl I had a crush on her after I saw that movie. And of course, she didn't say, "Hey, I really like you back." It was actually just very awkward and stupid. Probably should not have done that during my last week of senior year of high school. But that's a movie that really spoke to me so much so that it inspired me to do that leap. It was a really great film. I don't think it's the one that really became the seminal one. I think the one that... So you saw 16 Candles?
I never saw it when I was a teenager, but I just want to say about all these movies, John Hughes movies, they're very popular with the girls in my classes at the time, especially my sister. They're very... these movies are way more popular with women, I think, than men, the John Hughes movies.
Oh, well, I know guys who really like them too, but I think unlike some of the films that we've been talking, which have been more sex journeys, dude journeys, nerd journeys, I think there's more of a balance in the Hughes films, because he's really talking more about the emotional lives of teens and romance, and the sex is really not the big deal. These are not R-rated films. The movie that came out, I think, that really got the most attention is The Breakfast Club, which comes out in 1985. I remember I'm a freshman in college. It's around spring. I have a roommate. I've just seen Fanny and Alexander and his buddy and him. They come back and said, "Oh man, I just saw the best movie. It's called The Breakfast Club, and it's about these teenagers in detention, again, in the Chicago suburbs." Actually, I think I know which high school that is. I think it's in Evanston. And I'm like, nah, that's okay. I'm 20. I'm 19 going on 20. So I wait a couple of years before I see it. You've seen The Breakfast Club?
Yes, I've seen it. I watched it recently with my girlfriend, like, I don't know, a year or two ago. And
so just let me explain for those, the one person who hasn't seen it. It is about a collection of a wide vast of different types of high school kids: the jock, the nerd, the rebel, the loner girl, and the popular girl. Am I missing anything? And they all do detention on the weekend. It stars Molly Ringwald, Anthony Michael Hall,
Emilio Estevez,
Ali Sheedy, Am I forgetting somebody? Yeah, the one who plays the rebel. Judd, is it Judd?
Judd Nelson?
Judd Nelson is in it, right. So, and there's no plot. It's really just them getting to know each other and having a conversation and running around doing things they shouldn't be doing during detention. It's a surprisingly mature film, I thought at the time. I saw it I think I saw it when I was 24. Just one summer I finally rented it because I wanted to see what it was like. And I was actually very surprised by how character-based it was. What did you think of it, watching it recently?
Well, watching it recently, my girlfriend loves it. She likes to watch it. My sister liked to watch it, I remember. I don't know what to think about it. I mean, the characters are so... I don't know how to describe them, Chris. I mean, it's like some of them are similar to people I knew in high school, but I don't know. They just seem from another planet, I guess you could say.
Really? I could totally key into them. Into them. I really understood what it was like. I felt it was nice that they was sympathetic to all the different kids. Every kid in it had both a shallow side and a sincere side. The film only works because the kids seem like people and not like archetypes. Well,
that's the whole point of the movie, right? They start out as archetypes, and then they try to flesh them out more,
and it really works. I really think that when you watch that movie, you just see their innate humanity. I think that's why it's because it's not the plot. The plot is almost not there. It's a ballsy move, but I think it succeeds. And not only does it succeed, but I think it sets the stage in John Hughes to do other things about the emotional lives of teens. And I think you can really see it a lot in two films that come out 1 year apart that are essentially the same film, but the genders switch, which is Pretty in Pink, 1986, and Some Kind of Wonderful, 1987. Pretty in Pink, Molly Ringwald plays a girl from the wrong side of the tracks who has an attraction for Blaine, played by Andrew McCarthy, who's a rich kid. She has a best friend played by John Cryer, a very seminal 80s character actor who plays Ducky, who is a very nerdy guy, the nerdy new wave guy, who has a crush on her. And then that's the triangle. You've seen Pretty in Pink?
I think I might have only seen part of it. I'm not sure.
Okay, you haven't seen Pretty in Pink, or you would have acted strongly. Everybody in that movie really had a good career afterwards. Even the guy from The Blacklist plays Elaine's rich best friend. So if you haven't seen the movie, here comes the spoiler. I'm going to talk about it right now. She plays a really cool and interesting girl who does her own thing. She's kind of hip. She's kind of funk. She has her own style. There is a mall in it, but I remember the mall in it is actually kind of a nice experience because Annie Potts plays the older record store owner who's kind of a hip, colorful character. And there's two versions of this film. The original version, she ends up with Ducky, the nerdy guy, and not with the rich kid played by Andrew McCarthy, which is kind of very similar to 16 Candles in that she doesn't end up with Jake at the end of 16 Candles. Well, I don't remember. But at least there's a real ending. But it tested really poorly. When they tested the film, a lot of the people thought that would never happen, that she would settle for this nerdy guy. By the way, in this period in history, I dress and look a lot like Ducky. So every time people said, wow, you really look like Ducky, I always wanted to punch them because it just meant I looked like the guy who got rejected at the end of Pretty in Pink for Andrew McCarthy. No one in my life has ever said, you look like Andrew McCarthy. Though I would say I look more like Andrew McCarthy than John Cryer. And then a year later, it's reversed, and it's Some Kind of Wonderful, which is directed by Howard Deutsch, but is produced by John Hughes. And in that, Eric Stoltz is the poor kid whose best friend is played by she's a tomboy, played by Mary Stuart Masterson?
Sounds right. I'm not sure.
Yeah, I think it's Mary Stuart Masters, very good actress. And he has a crush on the popular girl, Samantha Jones, who's from Rich Place, played by Back to the Future's Leah Thompson. And in that one, it plays out in a very similar way, except Eric Stoltz is far less colorful. And everyone's a little less colorful, but it's the same idea. He doesn't end up with Leah Thompson, though he does gain a better understanding of her as a person. He actually ends up with the best friend, played by. So it's actually not. It's very different than Pretty in Pink. I remember watching both of those, not when they came out. I remember watching both of those almost like the same year, like maybe like I'm 23, 24, and thinking to myself, I watched Pretty in Pink like in my 20s. I didn't watch Some Kind of Wonderful until my mid 30s. And it's weird. They're both very good films. And I would definitely say they'd make for a great double feature. Have you ever seen Some Kind of Wonderful?
No.
Okay. Well, then the other two John Hughes films that I want to mention at this point are far more anarchical teens. And that is Ferris Bueller's Day Off, which I know you've seen. And that I was in college. I saw it when it came out. I saw it over the summer. Again, Matthew Broderick playing a variation of that cool kid that I saw John Cusack play so well in The Sure Thing, and doing a lot better. I would rather look like, someone said I looked like John Cusack at one point during that period, and I was far more complimented than to say I looked like Ducky. But it's a variation on that hip nerd who goes, and again, right, lives in a Chicago suburb, goes into Chicago with his best friend, who's Cameron, who's a bit more of a nerd, and his girlfriend, and has just a wild day. I mean, there's almost no real plot. There is some dark and serious moments.
Right. So Ferris Bueller and Adventures of Babysitting, they're both about the urban.
Well, let's talk about Adventures of Babysitting. So that's 1987.
Well, they're both about the urban-suburban divide, right? And like,
right. So Adventures of Babysitting. Let's just tell people what the movie's about first. Right. It's Elizabeth Shue who's the lead.
I think so.
Or am I wrong?
That sounds right.
Yeah, and she's a high school student in the Chicago suburbs.
And she's babysitting some kids, and something happens, and they have to go to the big city.
Right. So that's what I just want to make sure. So basically, that was executive produced by John Hughes. So these two films are almost running on parallel tracks.
Well, they're both very similar. I mean, Adventures of Babysitting is a little darker, but they're both about the urban-suburban divide, and so it's about rich suburbanites who have to venture to the wild, crazy, crime-ridden, ethnic, impoverished urban area for something.
Well, I mean, that's certainly, it sounds like a term paper comparing those two films. I will say that they're both, watching them at the time, they were both about what it's like to just go into the city and have anarchical fun. I mean, Ferris invites it, whereas the babysitter, she's not inviting it. She's a reluctant participant who has to.
Well, she's terrified to go to the city, as are all the kids. Yeah. Everybody. I would just want to say, Adventures of Babysitting. I mean,
she has to rescue her friend.
Right. I just want to say I was kind of, well, you know, the 70s urban cities in America were like crime-ridden. I mean, to a huge extent, right? I mean, but
I lived in those cities,
right?
So for myself, and by that point, I'd been to Chicago. I felt like the joke was on the suburban kids. You know what I'm saying? I had never had any sympathy for the suburban kids because I grew up in the city. So for me, I always thought of them as being somewhat silly. They were like the Beverly Hillbillies. You know, these kids, they didn't know how to comport themselves in a city, or what they thought that was fun in a city was a suburban's mentality. I definitely was a snob. You are from the suburbs, so I'm guessing you looked at it from their perspective.
Well, yeah, of course. I mean, I was
going into LA.
Right. Well, I was obsessed with Adventures of Babysitting for a little bit when I was a kid because, yeah, I mean, that whole idea that the city is this dark, dangerous place. I grew up with that idea, and but I also was fascinated by going to the city. I mean, I wanted to move to the big city as soon as I could.
Yeah.
I mean, if I, you know.
So for you, you were saying
a lot of kids.
Did you see that as a cautionary tale, or did Ferris Bueller and Adventures in Babysitting? Did it make you feel like, man, I really got to get into the city and have that kind of fun?
The latter, but the fantasy.
The latter means I never remember what that means. The latter means
the last thing you just said. So
get into that city and have that kind of fun.
Right. So which is what Ferris Bueller does, right? So
yeah.
The whole idea that the city was like this horrible, crime-ridden place. I mean, wasteland, like Mad Maxian wasteland. I don't think I totally believed it. That was the thing. Or even if it was like that, I mean, there were obvious advantages. I mean, so you grew up in that environment. So I mean, obviously,
well, actually, in fairness, the city, especially Chicago, New York, by the mid to late '80s, were going through a renaissance, a revival. They were getting yuppie. They were getting gentrified. They were getting much cleaner and much more fun. So if anything, it was getting away from the darkness. It was actually, as you said, it was more of a 70s version of New York City or early 80s version of New York City or Chicago versus where those two cities were trending, which was maybe the whole point of those movies, which is come to Chicago, come to the city, and have big fun. I mean, after all, it turns out for both those two protagonists that their time in the city is transformative and it helps them. Actually, there is a dark moment, by the way, in Ferris Bueller, but it has to do with Cameron and his dad and his car that he trashes. But for the most part, these are definitely about. Yeah, we're about to now get to what I call the culmination of the decade, and all of the things that we've been talking about really now get nailed by the last three films that I want to bring up for you, because they all kind of address suburbs, they address class, they address darkness. I don't think any of them really has to do with sex per se or romance, but these are all three films that I think are excellent. They're directed well. They have strong actors who would have careers well into the 90s and the early part of the 20th century, and some of them are still working today. And the first one I want to talk about is 1988's Heathers. You've seen Heathers, right?
Yes, I've seen it.
It's about the Heathers are the popular girls in the high school. What is her name now? The star.
Winona Ryder?
Winona Ryder plays, she teams up with
Krista Slater.
Thank you. Right, to basically murder off these girls who are the terrorists of their high school. A very dark fantasy. And I mean, in a way, this is the sensibility that goes all the way back to like to A Risky Business, but it's as over the top as even a film like Zapped. I mean, this is really it's a black comedy. This is not a John Hughes film. It was written by a guy named Daniel Waters, who I think probably was a teen at the beginning of the decade, and it's definitely informed by it's a really black comedy. Some of it is very homophobic. I can't endorse that part. There's stuff about all these comedies that when you take a moment to think about it, you go, damn, I really wish I had mentioned that part. But it is a satire. The clothing is over the top. The sensibility is over the top. It is absolutely not what it's like to be a teen. It is absolutely more of a wish fulfillment. But man, I love that film. How about you? What were you going to say about Heather?
Well, I haven't seen it in a while. I mean, I don't remember liking it as much as you did. I think I've watched it twice, but I haven't seen it in a long time. And I remember thinking I didn't get it. I mean, the performances are good, but I don't know. The story just left me cold. I remember thinking, I don't know. It's a little, I don't know. Maybe I'll have to give it another chance. I'm not sure.
It's not for everyone. Daniel Waters wrote Demolition Man. He wrote a lot of things that were very different. And there's a number of movies that come out of this. I think of like Mean Girls. I think of Clueless. There'll be a number of movies about the cruelty of popular girls. And again, it's definitely not for everyone. This is a dark comedy. I'll be honest. Either you're going to like it or you're not.
I feel like the high concept of it, like what you're saying, how influential it ended up being, the high concept of it is much more important than the actual movie, I feel.
And that's why the next film is also incredibly high concept. Also, in a way, it just falls right into the fantasy. And it again, it's a culmination of a lot of stuff, which is Bill and Ted's Excellent Adventure. I remember there's this thing called the Black Book of unproduced screenplays. So the script had been lying around for like 4 or 5 years before anyone decided to make it. It was, I think it may have even spent like a year just waiting to be released before it was essentially dumped in the spring of 1989. For those, again, this is a movie I'm pretty sure everyone has seen, but if you haven't, Bill and Ted are two dudes, very much in that Spicoli-like way, but they also play in a rock band, Wild Stallion, played by, was it Ed Winters?
Yeah.
Tim Winters, and young Keanu Reeves.
Well, it's basically like, yeah. It's basically
at the time of this recording, there is supposedly in production, or was in production, a third film. So I'm really
they're going to make a new one. It's basically like Cheech and Chong in high school, and they have a time machine.
The plot's a little neat. They find out that they're going to have an important destiny in the future. George Carlin plays a time traveler, but it's very important that the band Wild Stallion exists, and they have to go back in time so they can put together their history paper, which is due. Now, the neat thing about it is, while it's very high concept, these kids live in San Dimas, California, which gets us back into California.
Suburban, very suburban.
Suburban. And you've been to San Dimas. I was in San Dimas with you, and I was shocked when we went to find out that the places, that the water park, the ice cream place, those are real. Did you see it in the theater? Because by the time it came out, you yourself were almost 15.
I saw it I think I saw it on TV years after. I'm not sure when.
But you definitely remember when it came out.
But yeah, it was a very popular movie.
Yeah, and so growing up that's your bailiwick. I mean, you're not that far from San Dimas. What was the movie like from that perspective for you? Were those was that a recognizable world?
Well, look, in Southern California, when people say San Dimas, everybody knows what you're talking about. It's the suburbs.
What does it mean?
It's the suburbs. It's like Valley Girl. It's like the Valley. It's the suburbs. It's Orange County. It's And
it's that those dudes there's a variation. Those dudes exist. I've met them in real life. They're not quite as goofy, but they exist.
Well, they're marijuana addicts, right? What other movie?
Well, they're guys in a band. They're dreamers. They're misfits. They're not nerds, but they're definitely misfits. They're outcasts.
Well, what other movie were we talking about? In
the geeks world, they'd be the freaks.
What other movie were we talking about with marijuana addicts? It was.
Well, but it's not a marijuana film, dude. I think you're kind of missing the point.
You don't think that's a major?
No, it's about how these kids have a particular sensibility and the juxtaposition of that with history. It's what if the least qualified contemporary, it's almost like the inverse of, it's kind of like a weird way, it's an inverse of Back to the Future. In Back to the Future, you have the most realistic, normal kid thrown to do the most responsible thing possible. In Bill and Ted, it's just the opposite. You have the least responsible. You have the Jeff Spicoli. You have the least likely kids who are the least aware of what's going on in the world. And instead of even trying to write history right, they have no care. They're going to fumble through history like a real teen would. I mean, let's be honest. I definitely don't think any kid would be as sincere or as earnest as Marty McFly. Whereas I totally think that everyone can relate to the clown-like qualities of Bill and Ted, because on some level, they speak more to that C-plus student who's been tasked with a responsibility well beyond his ken.
Well,
but I think that to call the Cheech and Chong movie is too reductionist, because I really feel the movie resonates with most of us because it reminds us of our goofier selves as teenagers, whether we're pot smokers or guitarists or not.
Well, I think that if you watch the Cheech and Chong movies, you would see that there's a lot of similarities. I mean,
I've seen them, but I really feel like the Cheech and Chong movies are more about the celebration of marijuana culture. And I don't think that's true of Bill and Ted. I really don't. I think that I don't mean to be so mean. I just feel like you're really
well.
undervaluing.
I don't even think the Cheech and Chong movies are always about that. I mean, I think the Cheech and Chong movies are very inventive. They're inventive and fun. I mean, they have the same kind of sense of adventure and lightheartedness that Bill and Ted has, I feel.
But they're teens. And this is something very just different. They're in high school. They have responsibilities. They have dreams. They have girlfriends. Their way of treating these people from history is very, I don't know. But anyway, yeah.
It's a great movie, though. It's a fun movie. I mean,
it's a fun movie.
If you watch it today, you will understand immediately if you watch it why it was such a big hit, why there's so many.
Now, Bill and Ted Go to Hell is not such a good movie. It's an okay movie. Have you saw that?
Yeah, I mean, it's okay.
It's okay. Once they're not teenagers, I'm looking forward to the third film because they're just going to be a bunch of guys in their 40s and 50s. You know, like I don't know how middle-aged Bill and Ted is going to work.
One thing I want to say about Bill and Ted is it's one of the first time travel movies to really play with time travel, the absurdity of the whole construction of time travel. You know, the whole idea of time travel is completely absurd, and Bill and Ted really makes a lot of gags and plays with it and makes it funny.
Yeah.
And time travel is it's the fount of a lot of jokes in Bill and Ted, which it should be because time travel is ridiculous. I mean, but it's through the filter of what it's like to be a realistic teen or a teen who's just a goofball, which I do think is important. It stays true to the characters for sure.
The last film of the decade, I honestly think the last film of the decade that's a teen comedy is one of the best, and I really think it's the pure evolution of a lot of what we've just talked about, which is Cameron Crowe's, the writer from Fast Times at Ridgemont High, wrote and directed, starring John Cusack, who was in The Sure Thing. And he did a number of other teen comedies that I deliberately did see, like One Wild Summer, Better Off Dead. I didn't include them because I don't think they're good movies. Sorry, you may disagree. But in this movie, John Cusack and Ione Skystar, and he plays Lloyd Dober. It's senior year of high school. He's on the wrong side of the tracks. It takes place in a suburb. Ione Skye is his girlfriend. She's beautiful. She's smart. She's going off to college. John Mahoney plays her protective dad. You've seen this movie, right?
Yes.
What do you think of it?
You know, after getting through this whole list and talking about all these subjects, it's interesting now that I think about it. The Say Anything incorporates a lot of the themes that we've been talking about. I mean, the nerd, the stoner, the urban-suburban divide, class issues. It really incorporates all of these themes from this era. And it's kind of weird to think about. I mean, I remember watching it. I really seriously watched it a few years back, and I was surprised by how good it was. I mean, I remember it's another one of these movies when I was in high school, girls really liked it. It's got a very strong romance at its heart.
It's definitely more about romance. I don't think anyone loses their virginity. The only adult in it is the father character, and his comeuppance, spoiler alert, is that it turns out he has been embezzling funds and he goes to jail. But his comeuppance, he isn't he's not an arch villain like some of the principals we've seen. He is not as relatable as the Paul Dooley dad, who I think is excellent at playing dads. But he's a good guy. He's a little nerdy. He has the best intentions for his daughter.
Well, this movie at the end, it really tries to show, I mean, maybe unintentionally, the emptiness of the suburban lifestyle and suburban life and the whole notion of the suburbs. And
they escape.
Right. And after this movie comes out, all the kids who watch these 80s movies, they move to the city.
Right. Well, that's true.
A lot of them did.
That's true. It's a fitting. And then New York comes back again the next year in 1990s Metropolitan, one of my favorite teen movies of the 90s, but that's for a different episode.
I just want to say something else too. Just this might be way off topic, but I've done some studying of the economics of the suburbs, of what it takes to create and maintain the suburban infrastructure and urban sprawl. And, the suburbs as an entity are just not really economically feasible either.
Okay.
And, and people living in the suburbs probably subconsciously could sense this. I mean, and say anything is practically like, it's practically a comment on that.
I was just going to say that if you compare the way that socioeconomic issues are dealt with in Valley Girl, which is about this, or even in Pretty in Pink, by the time you get to say anything, it's much more. It really questions it in a much more interesting way, because the middle class setup is not very critical. There's no one is really criticizing what gets you to the suburbs. And Lloyd himself, and this really becomes almost a Gen X. Lloyd Dobler says, I don't want to be, he lists all the kinds of jobs that he doesn't want to have. And we've been talking about how a theme that you get in risky business is like all the ways that you can make money and be successful. And Lloyd just flat out tells the dad, I have no interest in this 80s zeitgeist of making money in the big business. I'm going to do kickboxing. It's the sport of the future.